Hi, welcome back to Wenshe Hybrid Talk. I'm your host, Yating. Today, we will have a discussion with our guest speaker, Dimitri, the host of Universal Will Function. He is a researcher of geopolitics and history, focusing on Russia's relations with the West. And today, we make a personal interview with him, and then it's more like a flow conversation. So if you have some questions, just leave a comment in the chat room. So I will start with my question since we know each other in a calisthenics park in summer. And so I will start some questions about sports because like I think the first time I met you, like it was quite impressive. You were doing handstand and then some like dips with 30 or 40 dips and then push-ups. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that you work out every day to get this like really strong athletics body. And then, so what motivates you to work so hard?
And thanks for the invitation and for like the interview. I'm happy to be here. And regarding sports, yeah, it's a very good question. Sometimes it's not that I cannot answer you like, fully why I work out, but for me, I just feel like my body needs this process in order to think better, in order to generate ideas. I feel movement is just part of my, um, I would say, just my being. So I cannot live without some type of movement, and it just gives me a lot of energy. So it's something that I'm so used to that it's just part of me. But of course, it's something that just motivates me to grow as an individual. Yeah, if it makes sense.
Yeah, because that is interesting because I also feel somehow in the same way since I start workout in the gym. And then I just feel like it's kind of something like a negative feedback. If you don't train, you feel bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you train and then maybe you get some dopamine or like some energy. But I also heard there's some like critics about this because some people say that there's a lot of narratives about like from fat to fit and then from skinny to fit that this type of narrative. And then it's just like if you have a very fit or muscular body, then it has been shaped something like really positive. But if you are like an average or you're just fat and then there's some kind of like have some like a discrimination and then this some I would call like some leftist person who are really active in this body politics, or we call it biopolitics. They say like everybody is beautiful. Every type of body is beautiful, and then no matter you are fat or thin, or it's just this type of narrative. And then um and my question is that what do you think of this Tanner as someone who is really really like a muscular and
Right. So I think there are two questions maybe here, maybe two ways to answer it. It's like one way, of course, I mean the whole body positivity topic is a pretty big one, also pretty big in academia. I've finished academia, so I can
yeah.
definitely tell you for certain that it's a big part of discussions. And I can understand where it comes from because if you think about 20th century, the whole concept was to force people into sports, either from American side or Soviet Union side. So those were the two big blocks, and people always try to, from state, can impose sports on you, something you have to do for their own state-related aims and reasons. But if you think about maybe from the perspective of your body is you're partially animal. I mean, your body belongs to this material world, and in a sense, it wants to generate some movement. It's like you as an animal, you would have a very active life. And if you even look at tribes in America or something like this, native tribes in America or South Africa or South America, I mean, you would see that they don't do sports in general, but they stay active because they have to. So for me, it's just a part. I think it's just my body just needs that, and I can neither feel good nor function well without fulfilling the need of my body to be active. So I guess it maybe it replies. I mean, I think it's like a body positivity. It's a big topic, but it's better to do what feels good for you. So don't really, don't really look at the body positivity topic and try and think of it as something that constrains you, I would say.
Yeah, I think I feel somehow the same way because even though these type of body politics like tell you
Mm,
like how this body or has been constructed by power, and
right.
then I think somehow these biopolitics is positive or is meaningful somehow because they tell people like how this discourse or the certain narrative has been constructed by power, and then we should somehow this constructed is
Mm,
kind of like a meaningful activity, but somehow like as a human and then we need certain movements. We cannot just say that yeah because it's like really right wing because like some
right.
Nazi Germany or like Soviet Union they promote this type of really masculine body or really fit body and we don't do that because we are leftists. So I just I mean because there is certain like nowadays on social media you can see different type of these ideas.
Mhm. It's also
Mm,
easy for people to justify why they don't do sports by saying it's
yeah.
something it comes from, I don't know, it comes from the capitalism
Yeah.
or from the state. So in a way, you have to be careful what type of information you take for granted and
Mm,
just be critical, because certainly I also would want some authority imposing some type of idea that I have to do sports on me. I
mm,
mean, if anything, I don't know how it is in China. Like in Russia, you still have to do a little sports when you were a kid in school, so you have like a physical
mm,
classes. And it's pretty annoying. You don't want to do them because it's just something that just takes a lot of your time.
mm.
Or instead of like playing football, they force you to do some stupid stuff. Um, and I didn't like that part. I mean, I think no one does. No one likes when you try to force you into something that you don't feel like doing.
Mm.
So I understand why people like choose it as a research question, because there's definitely certain type of leaning in the state to force to do something with your body. I mean, they're kind of designed, like I said, they're designed to do so. But then you need to ask yourself what makes you feel good, and if something makes you feel good, then I mean, truly makes your body and your mind feels good, then you probably should stick to it, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you grew up in Russian, like sport has been like your daily life in school.
I
What
mean,
was it?
I played a lot of tennis when I was young. I mean, not connected to school,
Oh.
but I played tennis since I was 6 to like 14 professionally.
So is it like a kind of like a Russian culture, like a social culture after the Soviet Union collapsed, or like it's actually started from Soviet Union that the whole society really emphasized sport?
Yeah, I think I would say in Russia, it's very weird not to do
Mm,
some sport when you're a kid.
mm,
I mean, it can also be some people, some of my friends, they played a lot of chess or something like
mhm,
this. So you have to go and I mean, and chess is considered technically a sport. So you have to do some activity that generative, so to speak, that can like either like sport related or
mhm.
competitive related in Russia. So it's something that all parents they give their kids to those communities where you do those type of things. It's very natural, yeah.
Oh, I think it's in China in my year when I grew up, it's quite different.
Hmm.
Like, even though we have certain PE class at the school, and then we were forced to do
Hmm.
jogging every day. That's why still I feel really miserable for that. But the problem is that most of the teachers don't really teach us how to do it in the right way, how to
Right.
do sports in the right way, because they would just so lazy or somehow they feel that if they teach too much and then the student can have the risk to get injured and then
Hmm.
they take some responsibility. And also there's a certain kind of social culture that they think like sports is useless, like for
Hmm.
like ordinary kids that you just have to study hard and then doing sports is just a waste of time.
Right.
And I think compared with others like our school activities, like for example in my case, my parents would rather to bring me to like learn English or some like instrument or
Hmm.
dance. I
Hmm.
mean, because I'm a girl, and then they think it's better to do this rather than to learn some MMA or like other stuff. So I mean, I grew up in this type of environment that no one really tell you that sports is important. And then so in my until my early 20s, and I feel that sports was really miserable for me. And then since I don't know when it started, I just feel like this strong women looks really nice when I start my college, and then I think, okay, I'm gonna do something, and then I really like this feeling.
Right. Yeah, in Russia, I think it's also the case that like if you're a girl, then you probably, I mean, there is a chance you probably wouldn't do some sports or some dancing instead, or some other social type of activity. That's also the case. I mean, maybe less so than in China. I'm not exactly sure, but it's also not that. It's not 100% common that every girl would do some type of sport. Yeah, but a lot of them still do because there is also the gymnastics is very popular or some other type of sports that or ice skating or something like that. Yeah, it's people still. I mean, a lot of girls do that as well in Russia. Yeah.
Yeah, in China, I mean, we are also kind of called like a sports country because we have so many excellent athletes, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but it's just a really really small, percentage of people who really focus on sport. But for the most average person like me, we just don't focus on that. We just focus on your study and
I don't know, I don't know whether it's true because I heard in China it's still the case, like in the Soviet Union, where they see a person with like a perfect, I don't know, build for weightlifting, and
yeah,
they would say, yeah, you have to do like
sure,
Olympic.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
still
yeah.
the case. I guess in Russia it's not the case anymore, but there is still, of course. I mean, because in Russia, there are like, at least in Moscow, there are those big, I would say, schools of athletic, I don't know, the sports schools, right? And once you go there is also the chance that if you see you are built for some sport, they would probably say you have to do that because, you were just built for that sport. So it's also the case. I mean, it's just interesting that it's still practiced in China.
Yeah, I would say so because for many type of projects, it's kind of like national, for example, like gymnastics.
Hmm.
But recent years, I think China's gymnastics is kind of getting worse, and then because this is also related with the comments of like what is good gymnastics. And what I heard that in China, they have different views of muscles because they don't really like women who has big muscles. What I refer to is just women, female gymnastic athletes, and
Right.
then because these gymnastics athletes, they were like really really small. They were even smaller than me. And then what I heard that they are not allowed to eat a lot because
Hmm.
they just really focus on techniques. But what I heard that the gymnastics in the US, they really focus on how to build the muscles for the athletes.
Right.
I don't know like what's the situation in Russia.
I think it's
Mm,
it's interesting that you brought up the United States because I think there is a difference in approaches in general in the
yeah.
United States and in Russia/China. Because in China it almost feels, or in Russia as well, it almost feels like an athlete represents the country, so they can invest a lot of into this infrastructure around bringing people from the street and giving them the best education, qualification, or just trainings that they can. And then once this individual achieves something, it's almost like the achievement is part of the society, right? And I think in the American case, it's almost always an individual story. And
Mm,
you always hear it from also even like a chess players or like a famous athletes. It's almost like the story of struggle of someone wanting to be something, but society prevents actually him from doing sports, and then the person perseveres. It's very different mythological stories that you hear in terms of athleticism in Russia or China and
in the US.
versus athleticism in America, which is interesting because it also, yeah, there is this, of course, it's something to analyze, of course, is how we conceptualize sports in society and of course achievements of great athletes in society as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think the attitude towards sports is also related to how this country or the society consider about being strong or the beauty standard. I mean,
Right.
for example, in China, like I think our beauty standard is nothing related with sports or like
Hmm.
muscular. For example, for men, they I mean, it's also kind of like an East Asia thing. Like, I don't know if you know this K-pop or
Yeah,
J-pop,
yeah,
like singer, and then they were like really pale, and
yeah.
then of course, they are tall, but they don't have like a
Muscles.
muscle. Yeah, and for female, it's the same. Like
Yeah.
in China, I mean, he's actually Taiwanese. He
Hmm.
concluded that the traditional Chinese beauty standard is like the women has to be 瘦白 幼弱 it means 瘦 means skinny, 白 means pale, 幼 means like you look like a teenager or
Hmm.
underaged, and then 弱 means that you are very weak. That is I think it's quite influential because like I
Hmm.
think I was born in 1990s and then when I was grew up in the early 2000s until when I was in my early 20s and then it was like girls around me like saying, oh, I have to lose weight. I mean, at the
Hmm.
beginning, I also thought like this, like I think I'm always too fat because even though back then I was only 40 kilos.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So like
interesting.
it's that it's never enough, and then we just judge each other by oh you look so you look so dark, you are not pale enough because then and then this like a quite toxic for me, and then
Hmm.
but I think okay since I start sports and then I don't care that anymore.
Yeah, that's
Mm,
yeah, that's true. Of
mm,
course, the different incentives, I would say, in society to pursue and not to pursue sports. I would say as a man growing up in Russia, I think like self-defense is also like a big thing, I would say. It's like
self-defense.
because I did like about martial sports and I mean you wouldn't feel as safe in Russia until you get some muscles. I don't know. It's like there at least when I was growing up, I don't know how it is. I mean it is still the case. I mean I also grew up I mean, basically in 2000s, which was after 90s, and 90s was a very tough time in Russia.
Yeah.
And in Russia, they had this culture around, Russian mafia, and Russian mafia was basically like the story of people who went obsessively to the gym in 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and then they realize, once you're just like big and jacked, you can just go and just, get money from the people who just started doing business or something like that. So it was actually like the story like that. So it was like this culture of very masculine man, and you wouldn't feel actually safe until you do some sport. So I mean, I did a lot of martial sports as well. Also, partially because it just makes you feel safe in Russia. I don't know what I mean. It's still probably the case because there is still this. In Russia, in I would say just regular like in people's culture,
Mm-hmm.
there is still a lot of I would say just admiration with this almost like a mafia style people, and you just feel safe, yeah. Doing sports, but you feel safer when you do sports. Then.
I think it's quite different because I think like in the 1990s, early 2000s in China, we also have like certain mafias. And
Hmm.
then because the back then like the state power wasn't that so strong, and then particular I was from the northeast of China, and then which is famous for the Chinese mafia.
Right.
But in my memory, like these gangsters they follow with them, and then they were like really really skinny, and then
Mm.
it's just a really different type of like
Yeah.
body shape, like a skinny, and then
Right.
just dye their hair into yellow and then smoke. It's
Mm.
just and in my memory or in some like certain like media image, like these mafia, they were not really muscular, they were actually really fat.
Mm.
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in Russia, I think some of them they are also fat, but their just origin is from because they all most of them came from those what they call in Russia sections.
Mm.
It's like a sport clubs.
Mm.
Because well, I mean, there were a lot of sport clubs in Soviet Union,
Mm.
and a lot of people did like I don't know judo, karate on a very I mean obviously the highest possible level because like Soviet athletes were like the best in the world basically. But once the crash in society happened, it's like I mean, first of all, they didn't know where to get money because the only thing you can do is just like to do karate. So what would you do with the skill? I mean, and in 90s, the skill became very valuable because obviously you live in this anarchic society where it's like everyone against everyone. So you can literally use your skills to generate income by being mafia. I mean, Russian bandits, I would say,
Mm.
mafia. So it's something that was valuable in Russian society. And to a certain point, still, I would say, is valuable in Russian society. Yeah.
Oh, so this type of sports culture is kind of related to the collapse of Soviet Union and then the
Mhm.
hard 1990s.
Yeah,
Mm.
I would say in Russian there is like a saying once you have like it's like not a perfect translation, but in Russia you say once you have a power you don't need anything else. But power it
Mm.
means like once you have a pphysical power you
Mm.
don't need to have intelligence or something like that, which is it says you a lot about mentality. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's quite different. Like in China, we have a certain word called like everything is it's the lowest level
Yeah.
unless like reading.
Lowest level, you mean?
Like because we say like 万般皆下品, everything except reading, everything is in the lower level. Like we really
Yeah.
like think like reading or being intellectual is something very nice. I mean, even though we experienced the Mao Zedong's era that is really has a lot of crackdown on intellectuals, but I
Yeah.
still think like many Chinese, and then we just think being intellectual
Hmm.
is way better than being like athletes or
Yeah.
yeah, so that's what they like. I think they like the guys like who has really, high education
Right.
rather than they are being very jacked.
Yeah, I think in China is famous for being, I mean, of course people talk about like
Mm,
international politics, but being very strategic. And I
yeah.
think it's, of course, it's something that definitely comes also from not necessarily from the state, but probably it's also part of Chinese society to think way ahead in terms of what type of. And of course, I mean, I think it's true in most of the case. If you are really very intelligent, you don't need to have a lot of muscles because, like, with
Yeah.
intelligence, you can, you can generate money. With money, you can buy
Mm.
everything else. I mean, it actually makes sense.
I mean, so nowadays, I mean, things is getting changed. It's like there's a lot of tension because like the beauty standards start to change because
Right.
particularly many women or girls, they start to like this guys who are very muscular, who like looks very jacked and looks very good
Yeah.
looking. Because in the past, like how man looks, I mean, in the dating market doesn't matter at all. But now it does matter. And
Hmm.
then this is like some guys they just didn't realize it, and then they just quite like don't
Right.
understand like why it's like this. I mean, I have very high education, I have money, but women just don't like me. But it's not like 100% like it, just certain cases because there's some like the host who is very famous host is point this reality that they thought like if they have the knowledge, they have the money, they have this like
Mm.
social status, and then the girls will like them. But it's not like this. So there's certain tension. But another problem is that there's of course also some critics, I think also kind of related to nationalism that because nowadays women start to work hard, work a lot, work out a lot in China
Mm.
because they want to get stronger because it's also related with the narrative of feminism. And
Mm.
then there's another type of narrative is that okay, if you just make your body like look really strong, you got very strong thigh and then very strong glute,
Mhm.
and then it's just really aligned with the Western beauty standard. And it's like, are you just trying to chase these Western guys? Because there's a certain tension that relates to feminism and nationalism.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, that's a definitely interesting question. Why why you do sports and what is your
yeah.
incentive to do sport? Because it's always I would might get my best guess. It's always
Mm,
partially cultural. I mean, and partially comes from within. At least for me, I would say. I mean, it would be lie to say that I don't do
mm.
sports for looks or something like that because I obviously do. I mean, but it's not something that. I mean, but also there is part of me again. There is that I cannot live without it because it's just the requirement of my body. Yeah.
I feel so. Like I think
Right.
once sports were just working out being part of your habit, and then it's hard to get rid of it because I
Mm.
just feel hard like recently because I have to finish my dissertation, and then I don't have a lot of energy to do sports. But at the same time, I just feel a little bit anxious and then guilty that I mean, do I get fat or do I just being out of shape? I think I'm just easy to get anxious on this point, but
Mhm.
yeah.
The good thing about
Mm.
that's how we met. I think sport actually unites a lot of people. So if you do sports, you can connect to so many different people.
True.
And I mean, I've connected to a lot of people through sports because everyone does some type of sport. I
Mm.
mean, either even if you just walk. I mean, like my thesis supervisor, I remember he did a lot of biking
Wow.
and some like push-ups and pull-ups. And I think it's something that still interests everyone. It's like there's no person that is completely indifferent to like any sport activity.
Mm.
So you probably still engage either as a spectacular or as just as an observer or as a participant in some type of sport activity. So it's also it's just a good thing to do because it's a way to connect to other people as well. I feel. Yeah.
True. Yeah. Like how we met each other.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. And about the way, another question is that do you take some very strict food
Yeah.
with the routine or just you take some supplement? Because
Yeah, it is like very dialed in. Again, something that I do. I don't even consider it something that is. I don't invest, a lot of mental energy into doing it. Something just became a default. I just, eat very clean. I more or less know what I eat in terms of calorie intake because I calculated calories for like
wow.
last 2 years. It's something that comes after certain practice as a very natural process to you. Um, I don't take it like I just take maybe creatine, don't take a lot of supplements because they're expensive, and it's also I don't like to be reliant on any particular substance. So I try to be very natural in my just way of thinking, in my other pursuits. And I feel always I don't want to be dependent on this or that thing
Mm,
because once the thing is gone, you almost feel like anxiety
mm.
that without this thing you couldn't achieve something. So
Yeah,
that's
so
my
yeah, well,
philosophy.
like a very natural.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
that's a cool philosophy.
Because it just one question came to my mind is that
Yeah.
nowadays people criticize sport because it's really to capitalism. Like
Mm,
first, like they think like for the person who has a really strong and fit body, it means that it actually reveals some structure in equality because one, it means that this person you have time and you have the money to buy these supplements and to eat clean food,
mm,
and then but not everyone has this because there's so many people they have to use this like highly processed food to stimulate them to
mm,
be happy, and then they have to work overloaded. So this is like one point, and another point is that if you want to have this type of body like on
mm,
the commercial and or on social media, they just make people quite anxious about how they look, and then these commercials about steroid, and then
right.
yeah, about over other supplements, they just come to you, and then it's quite like related to consumerism. So
Mm-hmm.
there's certain critics, but I mean, for my case, I think, I mean, it depends on how do you think. Like, for example, like I personally, I'm not that strict for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think sports is not really an expensive thing.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, there of course there's like a few topics here. I mean, steroids epidemic is
Mm,
really is of course a very bizarre but also very
yeah.
human, I think, part of human experience where people just take it to extreme. And of course, it's just very sad to see like so many people doing it in such a young age where they completely don't understand what they're doing and they completely don't know the cost. Because I mean, like steroids are just drugs. I mean, so they just become
Yeah.
drug addicts for the sake of just looking good. And they don't really understand. I mean, until you come like 25 or 30, you don't really understand what kind of repercussions this practice has. Of course, it's like a very tragic story. But in terms of capitalism, yeah, but you can be very, of course, minimalist actually, and of course, living a healthy life. I mean, it doesn't really cost that much because, even if you buy like the cheapest meat and just eat rice, it's not actually way much more expensive than processed food. It's just
True.
because, processed food is actually pretty expensive as well.
Mm.
So it's all about what you choose to spend again, your energy and your investment in terms of money or time in doing, because of course, maybe clean food requires, cooking. And if you, of course, I mean, I cook for myself as well, but of course, it would be nicer if, I had like a personal chef or something like this. It would make my life easier. But since I don't, I choose to invest my time into cooking because I don't buy processed foods. And it's something that I feel, um, in a way, the practice of doing sports and just living a healthy life also becomes this practice of being a little bit contrarian, doing something that is harder than it's just harder for people to do, and but it has like a certain, it's like why, like there is a reason why it's harder because it gives something in return in the future. So this is how I also think about those topics. Yeah.
So how do you connect your sport with your intellectual work?
Oh, that's that's an interesting question. Um, I think, no, of course, I think like for me, sport is just part of of course, part of my
Mm,
life, significant part, but not all encompassing because I am an intellectual person. I cannot really live without, I would say, intellectual
mm,
stimulation. And sport for me is also part to, I would say, to really push the boundaries and see where what's my ultimate development
mm,
in a physical sense. And And also for me, sport recently, I would say recent year became more meditative experience. I would say in a way that I try not to listen to music while I'm working out. I try to really concentrate on my body as a almost like a meditative object. So for me, like recently, I think about sports more in a way of like embodied presence, like embodied philosophy almost. Um, because just for me, just it just makes my life so much more rich, I would say. So this is how I connect the two levels. But this is it has been like I would say very recent development. So I'm also curious to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, me too. Like,
Yeah,
because I mean, sports is also a very important part in my life. And then, but nowadays, like, actually, I didn't see too many intellectuals, at least in academia, has like habits with sports, like in
right.
part of daily life. And then, so I wonder how is it connected? I know some people, they have the habit to do sports, but sometimes nowadays academia is like a really, really overloaded work, and
Yeah,
somehow they have to give up like the
yeah,
sports somehow like from like 5 days a week to just once a day. So
right.
because, but there's another question, and then I think like we talk quite a lot about sports, and then
Yeah,
now I want to ask you about your
yeah,
this intellectual work related to
right.
your podcast because you have a very interesting name for a podcast, Universal Wave Function. Yeah, it is like a quantum idea.
Yes,
So
it is.
how this connected to your geopolitics studies?
I thank you. I think you're the first one who actually asked me this question. I secretly wanted like someone to ask me this question because seriously, I talked to a lot of people, but like no one really asked the question why why my podcast has
Yeah.
specifically this name. And to be frank, I mean, it comes from quantum mechanics. I mean, I don't want to just give like the precise description, but it basically describes the whole universe as this superposition of all the states, and it's just basically one equation that kind of describes everything at once. And I just found like this idea is so fascinating, and it's not how people conceive the world. Because like we think about the world also in international relations and geopolitics as well as a very like a linear process,
Mm-hmm.
something that has like a strictly defined, I would say, boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
something that is also just linear.
Mm-hmm.
But and then I thought for my like I thought with myself, I mean, but if the world is deeply, I mean, if I mean, and as far as we understand, like the quantum mechanics describes the world way much more precise than any other theory of the material world. So if the world is deeply quantum, it also should have like a very great, like very strong implications for like a social studies or social dynamics, so to speak, because it actually means that our thinking about the world is incomplete, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I mean, this is the way to understand reality in a, like I would say just trying to take many ideas at once and think about social world and including geopolitics and international relations as an interconnected web of I would say activities and domains. So I don't really think, for example, about international relations as just it's just one aspect of my
Mm-hmm.
interests. But I'm also very interested in philosophy. I'm also very interested in relationships, and I think in a way those topics you can find a lot of connections between them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because I mean they're actually really connected, or at least you can make them connected. So this is why it's universal wave function. So it is something. It's an idea for me, at least as I see it now. It's trying to find some universality in actually multiplicity. So if it makes sense, I mean,
It sounds like very interesting for me because it sounds like you use this name like to
right.
really detect or explore the world because
Yeah,
not only focus on geopolitics or international relations. I mean, this is just a part of your thinking, and then you also want to because you mentioned that
yeah,
our thinking of the world is incomplete, and then you want
right,
to just explore more topics.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And I think it's just a very good metaphor for exploring the world itself.
Mm.
And of course, I think each of us tries to understand some, I would say, one aspect of
Mm.
reality. Um, but in a way we always try to understand the bigger picture. So
Mm.
by I think like the beauty, I think of the beauty of the concept is just by trying to understand a very small subset
Mm.
of reality, you probably contribute to understanding something bigger. Um, so this is my thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful metaphor actually. 'Cause I think like some quantum idea is related to mathematics, and then it's I mean the final direction of mathematics is always or physics is always about philosophy, about
Right.
how do we think or how do we think consider this world. So
Right.
this is a really beautiful metaphor. I like this
Yeah.
intake.
Thank you. Yeah, for me it was, I mean, I started my true exploration of, I would say, geopolitics and international relations, sitting with this, I would say, anxiety
Mhm.
and trying to understand reality with the theories that existed and just being very dissatisfied
Mhm.
because they always provide like those definite answers to problems that seem like, I mean, they don't seem, I would say, they don't quite, for me at least, I had a feeling, they fail to actually understand something or explain something, but because of the power of academia and those disciplines, um, they tend to look impressive,
Mhm.
but they actually lack explanatory power, or at least they just describe very small, I would say, subset of something, but then they want to make it look like it explains everything. It gives them a lot of predictive power, even though I mean, quite honestly, I think it does not. And then for me, it was always exploration of different ideas and how you can relate, I would say, ideas
Mhm.
outside international relations, classical international relations theories, how you can apply them to international relations. And then, I mean, I did a lot of, I would say, um, post structuralist theories and stuff like
Mhm.
this. And I mean, a lot of actually post structural theories inspired by quantum mechanics, or just some innovations in science and technology. Because I think we deeply, again, we just don't. I mean, it's one thing also to mention. We just do not understand actually the fundamental layer of physical reality. So there's always like a mystery there. And for me, it's also like there's always a mystery in international relations itself. Yeah.
I think it's quite insightful, and then so that's also like why I started to make podcasts because I
Yeah.
think somehow the academic world, like they just really focus on like really certain small topics, but
Hmm.
somehow because like nowadays if you want to publish something, you just can't say that I'm gonna write like a really huge landscape of this
Hmm.
certain field, and then like you have to focus on really small topic because there's so many excellent scholars, but what I feel is like there's also some like conversation between academia and then the public. So
Right.
yeah. And then I think even though podcast is not really considered as publications, but it's a very good way that for you to connect
Yeah.
with people or you explore different ideas. Like
Yeah.
not only focus on like a certain fields, for example, like history or geopolitics or international relations, you can just include more idea in this
Mhm.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the
Mm.
podcast is a place to, as you said, develop your own ideas
Yeah.
and see how they resonate or do not resonate with other
Mm.
people. It's a very human, experience. And of course, I think I'm grateful to academia for teaching me how to think.
Mm.
But then I think at a
True.
certain point you might realize that you yourself, I mean, at least I, in my journey, personal journey, I think yeah, academia doesn't satisfy my needs to explore it further because it tries
Mm.
to keep me very, in a way, constrained by its own standards, because it always tries to force you into exploring just this subset. And of course, there are like people, there are theorists who also theorize about international relations, so on and so forth. But then I'm not sure whether it's something that I really want to engage. Maybe in the future, if
Mm.
I feel I really have, like, we'll say, question to understand. But I think academia is also a little bit detaching from reality itself, as you also maybe described, because it fails to kind of integrate in the changing world, I feel.
Yeah, true. I mean, particularly nowadays, the world is changing too much compared with like 10
Right.
years or 20 years ago. Like, I just feel that somehow academia will these intellectuals, they are kind of backward in this really contested like intellectual debate, because nowadays I found like actually podcasters or some like social media influencers, they are really quite wanted. They have they are much influential than intellectuals. I mean,
Right.
just think about like the Charlie Kirk or like
Mm.
Hassan Abi Piker. Oh, what's his name?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think, but also the danger, I think that a lot of
Mm,
people who attract a lot of attention online, they're actually, I don't want to say they're not educated,
mm,
but they're very simplistic in their thinking,
yeah.
and thus they attract a lot of people. There is also a connection there. Of course, like populists always attract more attention than people who try to think deeply and try to question something, because people love answers
Mm,
and they don't really like to sit with
mm,
uncomfortable. I just they don't really to sit in the state of being uncomfortable that there is no answer. So they need answers. And those people, they provide like a simplistic answer saying, oh, it's like, let's just blame Hispanic, or let's
mm,
just blame black people for everything, and so on and so forth. I mean, it resonates them because I think people do have like the tendency to be very uncomfortable with unknown. And I think academia, to an extent, I mean, it teaches you to live with unknown, because
yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, especially in social sciences, you like you come to realization very fast that like there is no ground truth to explain everything. It's
Mm,
like it's always I don't want to say it's like it's mysterious necessarily, but there's always a level to go deeper. So, and like from one abstraction to another, and then it just basically shatters your previous concepts. Because I bet you also had those experiences that you thought that something is truth for some time. Maybe you
mm.
were like engaged in some idea, but then you found some like strand of literature that completely
Yeah.
shatters this understanding, and then you just like, well, at a certain point, I wish I probably hadn't discovered this, because I definitely believed in these categories, and the world seems it's like so it was so easy to explain the world in those categories. But once those categories are gone, it's like now you sit again with your thoughts and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think my research topic is exactly the case that's discussing China's economic reform. Like,
Yeah.
there's always a tab like narrative about how successful this reform it is and then how the unique China model it is. But until I reach this field, I read more literatures and some archives, then I just start questioning myself, like, is this like certain was called China model really unique, and then or like how does the China try to get these reform ideas, or is it like a really China story, or it's more like a global story? But it's another topic because
Right.
like my research, my dissertation is a really huge topic. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, so I won't really talk too much about in this interview. And
Mhm.
yeah, so I think you just basically mentioned like the motivation for you to make this podcast. Like, yeah, and then another question is maybe related to your experience in Germany and then Russia. Like,
Mhm.
since we mentioned academia, like, and then you also has like experience studying in Moscow, if I remember well. Like, do you find there's some differences?
Yeah, I mean, I studied at McGill University, which is I don't know whether there is something like this in China. So, but in Russia, I would say if you want to work for Ministry of Foreign Affairs,
Mm,
you have to go and study in this school.
yeah.
So
Mm,
actually, 99% of people
mm,
working in the ministry come from this school. It's like
mm,
it's 98, I don't know, maybe like a 2% of subset, like a people maybe who study like I would say physics
mm,
or nuclear energy or something like this. They go into department related to nuclear stuff or some very specific
mm,
technical things. But 98% graduates from like MGIMO University. So I went there because I wanted to be Russian diplomat. So I thought, but then of course I didn't understand. I mean, I was 17, so I was really young as well. I didn't understand implications of this idea
mm,
because I mean, I had a lot of homeschooling experience, I would
mm,
say, during high school, and I didn't really understand that what it means, like what Russian society actually means.
mm,
So for me, going to university was this experience of going into free academia,
mm,
similar to American academia, or something like you have at Freie Universität, something like this, meaning that you just go there to mostly explore yourself or your interests. So it's like it's a free place, so you can explore those different ideas. And of course, McGill University was like just the opposite of that. It was just it's just like a military school, but for humanities. They didn't really care about any ideas, exploration of ideas, but they gave you just a ton to learn in terms of languages, and you just had to follow those rules even though like the cost benefit of that, I mean, I realized it quickly. It's just pointless to learn language like this. Yeah, of course, you would still get a very decent at speaking language or just decent at translation, I would say. But at the cost of just spending 5 hours a day, like really studying just only language, because other disciplines they were just not really important there.
Wow.
So, and for them, I mean, it totally makes sense why they do that because they want to choose people who are brilliant. I mean, because it's a hardcore study program, um, and who are fine with just doing what your superiors telling you to do without kind of asking questions. So you just have to do it. And if you don't understand why, or I mean, just do it. Just don't ask questions. It's like so. This is like the philosophy of Gimo, and I'm bet nothing really changed since then because they really need people in the ministry who would do exactly that during work. So just they would work a lot, but they wouldn't ask additional questions because they don't need that. And of course, I was very, I would say, disappointed with the experience, and it's not something I realized I wanted to do. And for me, at this particular time, it was 2018, 19. It was the time that Russia was turning more authoritarian, obviously, and it was a choice for me. There was no basic institution that would satisfy my curiosity in Moscow. So I chose university in Germany because it's for free. I would say that was my. Even though I actually studied French, I still speak technically better French than German. But because it was how much harder to get into French school than German school. I mean, because for like free school, I would say. So that's
Yeah.
why I ended up here. Yeah.
So it's like a quite huge shift. Like,
Yeah, it was I mean, quite huge shift, but actually for me very satisfying because at Freie Universität, I think I found what I was searching for, meaning just like this academic freedom. I think it's still maybe not that free as American university because you still have to do the curriculum, but it's still in comparison to Russia, it was just a heaven.
so,
Yeah.
so it's only like your universities like this, or like other university also has the same atmosphere?
No, it was specifically GIMO. I mean, there are like very free universities. But then after that universities, you couldn't go and work in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I mean, in Russia, after I would say graduating international relations, and you can still, I mean, back in the day, like Russia was integrated more or less into Western world or the global world. Of course, there were places to work, especially with European languages. But now, of course, just even places. Once you have a degree, I would say from other universities outside thinking more in international relations or political science, it's yeah, I mean, you wouldn't really find a job anyway. It's harder. So yeah.
Oh, it sounds like so in general, like other Russian universities do have some like the discussion freedom of discussion in academia.
I think I mean, it's the situation is worse now. I mean, I think very few have. I mean, they do probably still have some freedom, but of course now it's very limited. I mean, the situation was also, I would say, during the time I moved, the situation was also changing rapidly, which means that now there are only few, I would say, places that are really, I mean, the few places where you can actually have a decent discussion, I would say. They all more or less became part of Russian like political agenda.
It's more like propaganda or
Yeah.
yeah, so, unfortunately, so
Yeah. Right.
so sounds like intellectuals who had some certain what we call liberal status where they
Yeah.
experience a hard time.
I mean, you can criticize the West a lot. You love to do it. I mean, you
Mm,
can, if you want to go and research bad economic situation in Germany, you're
yeah.
happy to do so with all the information from the Germany. Because I mean, what's interesting also about MGIMO, I mean, they still gave a lot of, for example, free press to
Mm,
us to read in English, like language courses, like
mm,
French or English. Because I mean, you still need to understand as a diplomat, of course, I would say the cultural dynamic of
mm,
this country. So what those people are thinking about and stuff like this. So that actually very interesting to see how, you were reading all those articles about
mm,
authoritarianism from The Economist or New York Times, and you had to translate them or whatever. And then, of course, there's no way you wouldn't really, think about those questions deeply in a way you
mm,
wouldn't implicate those ideas on the Russian case. But of course, the Russian case was kind of prohibited case to think about. So, I mean, even back then, it was something, it's a very uncomfortable topic. I
mm.
mean, of course, you could technically have a discussion with some professors, but that was a very uncomfortable discussion for everyone. Yeah. Yeah.
But then it sounds like you choose to be rebellious.
Yeah. Because I mean, I could, but also it comes from my experience because I didn't really, I can say I was never integrated into Russian society
Mm,
because I wasn't homeschooling a lot. So I didn't really get a full experience of being like a fully integrated person in Russian society,
mm,
which also makes it for me harder to understand how people just obey the rules
mm,
because for most people in Russia, that comes as just a natural thing to do. And of course, I mean, it's not that Russian people not critical or they
mm,
don't understand. I guess maybe it's similar in China. I don't know, but it's like they do understand everything. It's like they're not stupid. It's just like there's nothing for them to do. And I mean, of course, in most people, as a default setting, they choose to just to keep silent or just discuss those issues only in private with your relatives or just close friends because there is just no point in doing it in public or because you if anything you only get your life worse. Yeah.
I think somehow what you just described is a kind of similar situation in China.
Mhm.
Nowadays, I think the intellectuals also know this type of tensions related to nationalism and then this changing geopolitics. And but
Right.
then they just keep silent and then we because we have our works to do, we have to really focus on our academia work because they have to
Mhm.
publish a lot because that's
Right.
called academic task. If you don't finish this task, you will get fired. So,
Mhm.
and then also one, I was I think like 6 years, 5 years ago,
Mhm.
there's many just some young students in my age, and then because they discuss about if they should join the Communist Party, and
Mhm.
then it's just we don't know what is Marxism. We
Mhm.
don't know we don't know that, but they just say that yeah, but I need to find a good job, so I have to join the party, even though who cares about what is Marxism? But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like this. Everyone they know that this is how it's going to be like, but they just keep silent because we can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the same in
Yeah,
Russia.
yeah,
I mean, even though they don't force people technically to
mm,
be part of Russian state, because like, and at least it's not like in China and Soviet Union where you have like one party. And officially, they have a few parties, but like the system is everywhere. So
hmm
if you want to work for, let's say, university, you do have to kind of fulfill a certain requirements in the sense of how you
yeah.
talk and speak. I mean, of course, it's all implicit. It's not like there is a supervisor coming to you and telling you what to say, but like everyone has to adhere to certain standards. And
Yeah, I feel you because that's why I also feel very stressful when I go back to Chinese university and to talk
Mhm,
with the supervisors or it's not like certain the rules writing in the textbook. It's just
mhm.
like the certain, cultural things. And
Yeah.
then I remember that when I take the courses in IFU, the first year my PhD is about institutionalism, and then
Mhm,
it's like there's some institutions that wrote written in the law, but there's a certain it's some just I forgot that's the concept is just concept
mhm,
culture is also kind of institution. It's just
mhm,
didn't write in the law, and then you just have to follow this certain criteria and then how
mhm,
other people behave. And for me, I also think sometimes I'm not really kind of consider myself as rebellion because,
mhm,
but it's just I think I'm also different with others because
mhm,
I'm quite sensitive and then this I just feel like this pressure or how do you behave and also about uncle culture you have to drink with others and then
mhm.
you have to be a really really nice girl and then
Right.
just somehow it's make me really, really stressful. So, and
Mhm.
then I'm quite happy staying here, to be honest.
Right.
Mm,
And the interesting thing is like people, I would say people who understand Russian state closely,
Mm.
I mean, behind closed doors, they are probably the worst critics because they
Mm.
do know, they do see the corruption. You know, it's
Yeah.
like for corruption for them, it's something abstract. I mean, it's like even for example, I know people who work like, for like McGill University, let's say, and they do see like the like a blatant corruption that's happening on a daily basis,
Mm.
like something like people get accepted to university for money. Something that is completely actually, even in Russian standards to an extent, would be unacceptable. And they see it every day. So they actually like the worst critics of the system. But then because they're part of the I'll say part of the process, right? Even corruption scheme, and sometimes they cannot say anything because like even if you say something, no one would really, you wouldn't be able to do anything with this information. So it's also interesting in this way that it actually makes you more critical the more you know about the state. Like, yeah, but
So like the government didn't do anything about the corruption.
I mean, I think in Russian
Mm.
case, I think I'm not sure about whether
Mm.
you can implicate it to Chinese case, but
Mm.
corruption is part of the system. It's like
Mm.
how you keep the state running, unfortunately. I think you cannot really, I don't know, I don't know to what extent you can actually have a very functioning Russian state without
Mm.
corruption, just because the system is designed in a way, it's like corruption becomes its own institution,
Mm.
and there is no way to just get around it.
I think like for China somehow it's the same, but
Yeah.
like in the past, like I think before 2013, there's even some narratives say that corruption actually helps stimulate the economy because these officials and then they have more
Yeah.
like buy more things and then they go to the restaurant. It's actually really nice for the economy. But nowadays, I mean, because some like political struggles and then there's a really like anti-corruption, but I would say like somehow it's like can be like a price, but there's certain things they still like do it in a very like invisible way.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean in universities everywhere. But I just found that there's so many similarities between Russian and Chinese societies, and I think we just already talked for 1 hour,
Yeah.
and then maybe and we in the next episode we will talk
Right.
like about Sino-Russian relations since we have so
Yeah.
many similarities. Yeah,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. Maybe it
Mm.
has something to do with like this Mongol
Mm.
influence.
Yeah,
Maybe. Yeah. I don't
yeah.
know.
And thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Yeah.
Is there any questions?
Question. We can have a break for 5 minutes, then
Yeah.
we can discuss
Right.
the
Yeah.
next topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was great. Yeah. It was very interesting.
It's still enough stream.
So,
It's still enough stream.
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah.
You we make a pause for live stream or we just continue with that?
We continue.
Okay,
I mean,
okay,
but we have a break
Oh,
for 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Mm.
I mean, we should now talk about something unrelated because it's still live stream.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. It was interesting. Yeah, share a link with me and I will share it with my network. Yeah, once you upload it.
I think
Yeah.
later, maybe when I finish this, I want to share it to the Insta stories. So do you
Yeah.
mind if I hashtag you?
Yeah, yeah, perfect. Sounds good. With the video, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
I will
great.
share the link. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah,
Because some friends said that when I finish it, I should definitely share it.
for sure. Yeah, I'll definitely share it at home.
I
Yeah.
like this interview.
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting. Definitely, we can like.
Because I thought it asked you the questions I always want to ask, like because
Yeah.
like universal wave functions. I was thinking of
Yeah. I think a lot of people think about it, but they never ask.
Yeah. And then yeah, because today is a good opportunity to ask.
Yeah, I remember I even asked my friend once, my friend
Mm.
who recorded the podcast, yeah, maybe you can just ask about the name. But he's like, I don't know what it means anyway. So it's like, yeah.
We can change.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So, so you can stay here.
I stay here.
转一下就行了。
Oh, okay.
对对
Very good.
那个，然后那个是他到时候你试一下。
哦，这么简单，这样子。
对，这样出来，然后的话，那个可以看那个。
啊，
对，如果肯定
这个上面没有什么问题，no questions。
对，没。So yeah, we're busy.
Yeah,
And yes, I think this is a heavy burden. Uh, just now, as Yatin has interviewed Dimitri,
yeah,
I think this is a very personal experience. And
yeah.
maybe after 3 or 4 minutes, we will talk about something very different. It's
Yeah.
about the Sino-Russia relationship.
Right.
Yeah, it's nothing about the personal experience, but we can have some personal perspective,
Right,
right?
right, 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 right.
So I think it's a good opportunity for all of us to talk about the Sino-Russian relationship. You are Russia, I'm Chinese,
Yeah,
we are in Germany.
yeah. Right.
It's interesting. I think Sino-Russia relationship is important. It has an impact on the rest of the world. Probably we can discuss the Sino-Russian relationship from the war in Ukraine. Just now, you have mentioned the American government, the U.S. President is pressing Ukraine to accept a 28 points peace plan, the so-called peace plan. So maybe we can talk about this peace plan as a beginning, and then probably we can talk about its impact on Sino-Russia relationship and whatever. It's just a free conversation.
Right.
So my first question to Dimitri, I know you are also very interested in the war in Ukraine and its impact on the rest of the world. How do you think of the 28-point plan from the U.S. government? Do you think it's possible, feasible? Do you think Ukraine will accept this plan?
I think, of course, we're still very early in real negotiation process. I definitely don't expect any breakthroughs, and so I don't expect any peace in the near future. But at least it's interesting to see that they're doing something in a way that at least this peace plan, to me, it seems more, it's getting to Russian position closer, because it is, I mean, it is as a plan more favorable to Russians, right? Because it basically means for Ukraine to capitulate, right? Because Ukraine has to give the lands, it has to give it will Russia will get recognition for the lands that it gets, and then of course Russia also reintegrates into the West. I mean, into G8 at least. It was very interesting, like part of the deal for me at least to analyze. And of course, what makes it also interesting for me, it's there was some involvement of a very senior Russian politician, like the head of the Russian like this big fund, right? Basically, the old pile of Russian cash that they have, and I mean they still don't use it that much, but like the person obviously has a very important role in Russian society. So in this case, I still don't expect much. For me, it's just probably the first steps in the development process. And also one thing important to mention, of course, when we bring Ukraine into conversation, Russia does have at least now a significant advantage in the front line. Again, I'm not a military expert, but it seems once they captured Pokrovsk or something like this, and now they go into the next winter, and then after winter, obviously Russia would have another offensive. That something is starting to change because, of course, we are having the war for more than 4 years. I mean, it will be almost 4 years very soon, which is a very long time for intense war. And of course, the war will have to settle somehow, right? So for me, it's just important first part of some process. I would say I do analyze it as an important development. So how do you look at it? Also, maybe from Chinese perspective.
Yeah, I cannot comment on the development
Yeah.
from the so-called Chinese perspective because China is so big, so
Yeah.
complex. So just my personal perspective. So I do agree with your assessment. the 28-point plan from Trump administration is very favorable to Russia. According to this plan, I have not gone through the full details of this plan, but I know some high-level information about this plan. Ukraine must abandon its territory in Donbass. Actually, this is a demand from Russia for a long time. And Ukraine cannot join NATO. Ukraine is not allowed to join NATO in the long run, maybe 20 years. Ukraine has to make an official promise. And Ukraine armed forces must be reduced to maximum 600,000 personnel. This is very tough condition for Ukraine. For some European politicians, they call it as a capitulation of Ukraine. I don't know, but generally speaking, it's very favorable for Russia. So I'm thinking about why the U.S. government is putting huge pressure, tremendous pressure on Ukraine to accept Russia demands. This is very different from the position of the predecessor of Trump, I mean, Biden administration. Actually, Biden administration has supported Ukraine with tremendous money and military equipment, as well as moral support. So, but Trump has changed the U.S. position radically. I'm thinking about it. I think in the past we have discussed fundamental reason behind the radical change. I mean, the U.S. does not support. U.S. supports neither Russia nor Ukraine. I think the fundamental national interest of the U.S. is that the Eurasia continent should not be dominated by anyone. By anyone, France, Germany, Russia, China, anyone. U.S. does not allow any country who is dominant in the Eurasia continent, because the logic is quite simple. If Eurasia continent is united by any country, then that country will have the power and the resource to challenge the hegemon of the United States. That's why the U.S. has participated in the World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. Right now, I think the number one challenger of the U.S. hegemon is China. So in order to counter China's rise, the U.S. has to do everything and anything to weaken China's power or influence. Right now, China is united with Russia. I think, China and Russia have a very good relationship. I think Trump is very. Trump has tremendous anxiety toward the Sino-Russia coordination or collaboration, something. That's why it's very urgent for him to end the war in Ukraine, thereby U.S. can therefore U.S. can transfer or shift its resource and attention from Europe to the so-called Indo-Pacific or Asia. I think this is the reason. And in order to do that, he must put pressure on both sides, Russia and Ukraine. It has proved that Trump is not in the position to change Putin, because Putin is so tough. Trump has tried several times, but he has failed. It looks he has more leverage on Ukraine, because Ukraine is dependent on the support from the U.S. and European countries. If you are talking about the military dimension, I think the U.S. plays more important role than European countries. That's why the U.S. has leverage. I think this is geopolitical logic behind Trump's plan. This is my general understanding. What's your idea?
I think I also agree with your assessment. Something I remembered actually from the plan, there's also one part of the plan is to that America gets access to Russian what do they call, like, not the mineral resources, but some resources for um um some some resources. It gets to critical minerals from Russia, and maybe if you of course follow the whole, like, this AI race between China and the US, and the importance of critical mineral is something that we as analysts should, pay attention to. And I think it's also yet kind of strengthens your thesis here, because and it's also interesting, of course, because it seems like now Trump gives Russia more incentives to reintegrate into the West, because I mean, first G8, of course, lifting of sanctions, and then access, and then Russia would trade critical minerals with the US, which is, like, if you think about those 3 points, it's a very big shift from, of course, from Biden, but especially even from just the current situation where Russia is completely isolated from the West. Um, so it's definitely interesting to see to see this development, but then of course it is a plan, something how it will look actually in the future. It's something we have just to see, because it also cannot, many things from this plan, they probably won't materialize. um, but I mean, it's also maybe interesting to ask you whether you think, like, the US is trying to flirt with this idea of detaching Russia from China, or maybe trying to get some advantage from Russia right now, because of course I think it's like like it's just like geopolitics 101. If you get Russia on board now against China, I mean, the US will get some advantage. I mean, you can argue whether it's significant advantage or not, but it will, at least it can keep the balance of power, of course, in Eurasia, but also in the world itself, because Russian American alliance potential can have certain implications, beneficial implications for Americans.
Mhm. Yeah. I think the impact of the end of Ukraine war is huge. It seems that Ukraine has limited choice. Yeah, of course, Ukraine will discuss with the European airlines, uh, but it seems that the U.S. government is determined to end the war and shift its focus, I mean, the attention and the resource from Europe to Indo-Pacific. I think it's quite clear that Trump is trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China. Right now, Russia and China work closely. They support each other. China has economic power and an technological resource, and Russia has tremendous natural resource, and Russia's military force are still very powerful. Yes, Russia has not performed very well in the battlefield in Ukraine, but Russia still has formidable military forces, especially its nuclear military forces. So Russia is still a formidable superpower from my point of view. I mean, if Russia and China work very closely, this will be a huge problem for the U.S. Yeah, I think Trump has the intention to drive a wedge between Russia and China, like the so-called reverse Nixon-Kissinger process. Everyone is talking about that. But intention is just intention. It does not mean the capabilities or the outcome. But right now, I think probably it's possible that Trump can uh, attract Russia more than before. Maybe Russia will not break its relationship with China. Definitely. I mean, today it's not possible to repeat the stories in 1970s. I don't think the reverse Nixon-Kissinger process is possible, but it's possible for the U.S. to drive a wedge between Russia and China because right now, from my point of view, Russia is very dependent on China's support, economical support, moral support, probably military support, because China has provided a lot of dual purpose products to Russia. I mean, both for the civilian purpose and the military purpose. So Russia is very reliant on China. I think the offer from the US is very attractive to Russia because Russia can return the G8 group and the sanctions imposed by Western countries will be cancelled. So I think that means Russia has the opportunity to join the community of Western countries, both European countries and the US, because I think Russia's identity is still a European country.
Right.
If we have knowledge about Russian history, I think, yeah, from cultural perspective, Russia is still one member of the European community. And maybe European countries have very complex feeling about Russia. But if you look at the history, Russia is a European country. So if the war is ended in Ukraine, I think Russia will have chance to join the European community again. Yeah, I think this is very attractive to Russia. This time, I think the probability has increased that the war can be ended and Russia will return the Western community. This will be, of course, challenging to China because China will be, I mean, right now, China has Russia as a partner or ally or whatever. But in the future, if the war in Ukraine is ended, that means Russia will be more distant from China. So I think for Chinese decision makers, they will not be happy to see that progress.
Right. I think it's also, of course, interesting that from Russian interests, like Europe itself is way much more valuable than the US. Because, like, first of all, it's actually pretty hard for Russia to trust the US. Again, as you said, maybe the reverse Kissinger policy would actually be very difficult to achieve because Russia like looks at US actions and it doesn't trust. And if you even can achieve something between, let's say, Trump and Putin, there is no guarantee that it's a sustainable policy beyond that, beyond Trump term, which actually ends, I mean, almost in 2 years, like soon in 2 years, so to speak. So it's something like, okay, 3 years, but it's still a very short period of time. And of course, Russia wouldn't just abandon relations with China just because of that. But something also what's interesting then, of course, if we look at European, I would say, market, European integration as Russian long-term trajectory, a long-term goal. Of course, it's interesting whether, of course, it's interesting whether it's very interesting. What would be the role of China in this, like say, like a renewed relationship between Russia and Europe? Because I feel there is in some parts of Russian, I would say geopolitical, like in some geopolitical thinkers, I would say in Russian elites, they have like this almost like a dream that Russia would be a country that unites China and Europe, or in a way that Russia is like a bridge builder. I mean, you've heard of that. I mean, it used to be a very popular idea before, of course, the war and like everything that happened, especially before even 2014, that Russia is actually this Eurasian country that has, of course, a foot in the West, and then has a foot like has a good relationship with China. So once you can connect the dots and make Russia is like this bridge civilization, I would say bridge builder. That's this kind of Russian purpose and mission in the world. Of course, I don't know whether it's true or not because it's very, of course, difficult. It would be very difficult for Russia to reintegrate with the current European, I would say, government. I mean, European Union policy and agenda. But if something changes significantly in European Union, or if something changes, for example, in Germany, if we have a complete reversal, if AfD comes to power, for example, you can have actually pretty significant change of course in European policy as well. And then maybe Russia can play like an interesting role here. Because I mean, I definitely, I'm not that knowledgeable, of course, about the Chinese foreign policy, but I definitely don't actually trust. I would say I don't trust like American perception of China, because American perception of China, it's the similar in Russia, like American perception of Russia. Russia is just this like imperial power that just wants evil in the world. I think it's I definitely maybe not the case. Like, well, I mean, maybe parts of the truth that China wants to maximize its power, but then of course every country wants to maximize its power. So it's not just China or Russia. What I'm trying to say is maybe, of course, reintegration of Russia in European, I would say, community would be beneficial for China as well, because then you can build like Silk Road to Europe through Russia, and have like a way much more European community integrated into this Eurasian landmass, something like this. Yeah, yeah.
This is a very interesting idea that the Eurasian continent can be united.
Right.
You have mentioned Russia wants to be the bridge between East and West.
Right.
From geographic perspective, this is natural.
Right.
Because Russia is located between Europe and Asia. So Russia should be the bridge between the West and the East. This is a fantastic idea, but it's very idealistic from my point of view. I think after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and even before the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has the idea to Russia has promoted the idea that the Eurasian continent should be united from Lisbon to Vladivostok. There should be one community, one security architecture. But for me, this is very idealistic. Just now you have mentioned evil or something like that. I think I'm a realist. I think from realist perspective, no country is evil or angel. No, everyone is the same. Everyone is the same, same good, same bad. From my point of view, I think this is an old question because for the maritime power and the continental power, they have different understanding about the world. From the geopolitical perspective, the continental power want to conquer more territory because if you have more territory, you have more resource, you have more power. And the maritime power is different. They want to promote trade. And if from promoting trade, you can have more wealthy. So they have different idea. And for the maritime powers like the British Empire and today's American Empire, for me, the U.S. is an empire. They always have used the strategy of divide and rule, and they are always successful. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Everyone is clear that the British Empire and the United States are very good at the strategy of divide and rule. But so what? I mean, the Eurasian continents cannot be united. Like you have mentioned, probably it's good for everyone if Russia can play the role of the bridge between China and the West. Actually, Russia has the idea Eurasia economic union. China has the idea too, the Belt and Road Initiative. Actually, for China, the original purpose of Belt and Road Initiative is to connect China and Europe through Russia. Through Russia. Russia is in the middle between China and Europe. This is the idea of China, but I think it's very, very difficult. Because there are so many problems, conflicts, contradictions, confrontations between among Euro-Asia countries. For example, between Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and the EU, between Russia and China, between China and Japan, between Japan and Russia. There are so many contradictions. So it's very easy for the United States to drive wedge between these countries. For example, right now, there is a huge, very fierce conflict between China and Japan. And Japan has a support from the US. And I think it's very easy for the US to encourage Japan to confront against China. And China has no choice but to escalate the conflict with Japan. Actually, for me, the conflict between China and Japan has been escalated. It looks quite dangerous for both countries. I mean, it's always a good idea to unite the Eurasia countries, but from practical perspective, it's really difficult. Really difficult. I think in the foreseeable future, I don't think it's realistic. For example, now U.S. is putting pressure on Ukraine, and probably it's European allies, but I don't think European countries will accept the Trump plan. I think there will be conflict between Brussels and Washington. I think the support from European side is still very strong, and the European countries are taking more responsibility in supporting Ukraine. For example, we are in Germany, and Germany is taking actions. Yeah, maybe slowly, but it's unreversible. And Germany is investing more on defense, both the military force build up and the defense industries. I think Germany is determined to do that. And yeah, I think it's not so easy for EU and Ukraine to surrender. So this is my estimation.
Yeah, at first glance, I would also say it's not. I mean, they wouldn't probably want to surrender Ukraine, but then of course you look at the, I would say, macroeconomic conditions of the European Union, and they also, it seems like they don't look that good. So it's not that the European Union can do anything with that in a way that, from a long-term perspective, even like let's say 2-3 years perspective, there is no leverage for European, like there's no leverage in the European Union to impact like this dynamic, because like first of all you have like recession in Germany, which is like, the biggest economy, so like, and then I mean everything else, if even if Germany has recession, then everyone else definitely not feeling good in the European let's say like economic system. So it's something also that I think a lot about, because it seems there can be a reversal of the whole European, I would say, agenda or policy, and of course it can happen very easily if you have like if AfD comes to power in Germany, or if there are changes in France, which are two countries that are critical for European, I would say, integration and future development. So of course, like for example, European countries, they had period of time to demonstrate that they can step in this war and do something, like during this 1 year since Trump became president. But of course, they didn't do anything. So it's also like it's a very in European. It's a very European thing to have like this rhetoric, but then failing to fulfill like those not even obligations, but those desires to be part of the conflict and stuff like this. So of course it's a very interesting dynamic, but then of course, like realistically, of course, I question whether they can do actually anything, because Ukraine, I mean, from Ukrainian perspective, it's also interesting because I would also think at a certain point Ukraine would become very frustrated with both the United States and European Union, because of course, like now Ukraine understands that there is a chance that the US will completely withdraw from support of Ukraine. but then they also understand that, I mean, Ukraine also understands that realistically, European Union just talks a lot and just does nothing for Ukraine. So this is also, of course, it's a very dangerous place to be for Ukraine because they need to make decisions, and there's also they have their own internal policy and stuff like that. So it's also interesting to look at it from this perspective. And I mean, I think they don't really have just leverage to change anything. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very popular perception toward Europe.
Right.
Everyone looks down on Europe. Everyone, including American, Russia, and Chinese. Everyone believes Europe is weak, and they don't have the power, and they're not united, and they have no military power. But I think probably people have underestimated Europe. You know, now the EU is the second largest economy after the US. Previously, it was China, but now the total GDP of EU is a little bit more than China. This means EU has tremendous economic power, and EU has a biggest single market in the world, more than 500 million people, and most of them are developed countries. So I mean, from economic perspective, actually EU is very, very powerful. From military perspective, EU is not weak. EU is not weak at all, and the French have nuclear weapons. They have nuclear driving craft carriers, and of course. UK is also one European country. From my perspective, they have also nuclear weapons, and this is from military perspective, and from cultural perspective. I mean, soft power. EU perceive itself as one normative power. I think it's true, especially under the circumstances that the US is withdrawing from international stage. This means that EU has more moral influence than before. So this is true. I think we should not underestimate the power of the EU. For example, in Germany. Well, in Germany, everyone believes Germany is finished, especially in China. Many Chinese people look down on Germany. They believe China has been more powerful than German industries, especially the automobile industry, because the electric vehicles, China has made a huge progress. Germany is finished. I think this is wrong, because Germany and EU are still very powerful. Right now, the economy of Germany is not so bad. And according to the forecast of EU next year, the GDP of Germany, I mean 2026, will increase 1.6%. This is very impressive. I think over the last years, the growth of German economy is negative, but next year it will be 1.6%. One economist from Denmark has made one interview with one German newspaper. He's very optimistic. Maybe over the coming years, the prospect of German economy will be very positive, because Germany has found a new source of growth, defense spending. Yeah, it's true that German car makers will lose market in US, in China, or somewhere else, but they will have new customers. Defense spending, because Germany has decided to spend much more money on defense right now. So from this point of view, I do believe German economy will be very optimistic over the coming years. So I think European countries, including Germany, of course, still have a powerful leverage. For example, right now, China is the number one strategic threat for China. So, in order to counter the pressure from the American side, China needs the EU actually. If we talk about the issue on Taiwan right now, China has huge conflict with Japan. Actually, EU has done something very bad from China's perspective. They have invited the so-called vice president of Taiwan to visit Brussels. This lady has spoken before European Parliament. But what's the response of China? It's not so strong like the protest against Japan, because China still needs EU, not only the political support, but also the economic relations, because China still needs the European technologies and the capitals and the market from the EU. I mean, for China, EU still has very strong leverage. For Russia, I think the situation is the same. Actually, Russia has very weak economic connection with the U.S., but with the European countries, the situation is different. I mean, I think the trade relationship between Russia and Europe still very strong. If the war is ended, if the sanctions are lifted, I think Russia will restore its economic ties with Europe. So I don't think European countries are weak, although they believe so. I think even the European people, even Germans, they believe we are helpless, we are so weak. It's not true. This is their tradition. They always believe they are weak, and all the other superpowers, China and Russia and Americans, they are too strong, too powerful. Well, we are nothing. We are small. It's not true. I think we should not underestimate Europe, including Germany. Actually, they are still very powerful. They have huge potential, especially Germany. Recently, I have seen one news. The U.S. government wants Germany to take over NATO. Right now, the top commander of NATO military forces in Europe is always one American general. Always. I mean, over the past 70 years, always the top commander of the NATO military forces is one American general. But now they want one European. To be clear, one German general to take over that responsibility. This means actually this is a golden opportunity for Europe, especially Germany, to take more responsibility, to become the so-called normal country, because right now the situation has changed radically. America, the United States wants to focus on China. Then American has to shift its burden, in other words, leadership to European countries, especially Germany. So from my point of view, Germany right now has a golden opportunity. The question is that if they can seize this opportunity. I think the merged government is determined to seize that opportunity. Merz has promised that the German military forces Bundeswehr should be the strongest military force in Europe. Of course, in conventional terms, not in nuclear terms.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's of course it's an interesting take. Also, it goes counter main narratives, I would say, which just makes it definitely very interesting to analyze. I think, yeah, the problem with EU, of course, it's a still relatively new institution. So we do observe, I would say, its formation at this particular moment. So it's very unpredictable in a way. I think it's true that European Union holds a lot of potential, but since it holds a lot of potential, it can also break the same way, because there is like a two-way street where it goes like into this direction of more accumulating, I would say, more power in geopolitical terms. But of course, it also can go in the direction because it definitely has a lot of vulnerabilities because it's not literally one state. It consists of many states, and once it takes only one, I would say, member, like a foundational member of EU to, of course, to crush the whole system in a way. So it remains to be seen what's with the European future from this perspective. I think definitely Russia right now serves as this unifying agent for European Union because it seems that they found this new identity how to define themselves. Or, we as something that against Russia, for example, which people couldn't say, I think, before maybe the war in Ukraine, because before the war in Ukraine, it was a little bit unclear what it means to develop like the common European defense system, like the common European defense network, or what it meant for European Union to have a common defense policy. Of course, in relation to Russia, it makes it more clear. But then, of course, I also, to a certain extent, I ask myself whether this is a sustainable dynamic, because, I mean, of course, there is the European Union, but Russia still is mostly, I think, afraid. Of course, we tend to believe, as an analyst, I think it's also conventional wisdom that Russia is afraid of the United States. It's actually not afraid of European Union. So once you get European Union or United States out of Europe, I mean, Russia can provoke European Union in a way because, I mean, of course, I also don't believe in the fact that Russia would go uh, you would, start war with the European Union just for the sake of starting the war. But if tensions escalate, of course, Russia can provoke. I would say some it can have some small provocation, whether it's in with Baltics or Norway. I mean, remains to be seen. Of course, Russia has I mean, how many neighbor? Like, I mean, Russia at least has, um, common. Russia has a boundary with so many European countries. There are so many ways to actually escalate the situation. So, I mean, yeah, well, let's see, let's say how it unfolds in the future. I mean, I'm also interested, maybe your take, whether it's true that, I mean, people saying China buys a lot of. I would say companies in Germany and in the European Union, so to speak, which is a very interesting development because most of them they go almost bankrupt. Like I mean, they're very big companies. I don't remember the exact names, but very big, like German conglomerates. Like they're now partially Chinese, so to speak. So because they see the opportunity, Chinese see the opportunity, and they buy them. And of course, some of them. I mean, there was famously, like China famously, there was like this debate about the port in Hanover, like a very big port that China bought. Well, I mean, it wanted to buy, maybe it was blocked by Americans or something like that. So China also invests a lot in European infrastructure, which is also well known, especially in the countries that are not that prosperous, like I don't know, Hungary or other smaller, Italy or some smaller countries. So it's also interesting for me to understand why is China doing that. So it's like, why is China investing actually in European Union, even though it seems if something happens in terms of between, let's say, America and China, I mean, it would be very easy to just take this property from Chinese, so to speak. I don't know.
Not anymore. I think maybe several years ago, China has invested a lot of money
Yeah.
in Germany and other European countries, but not anymore. I think because of many reasons. Firstly, China has no sufficient financial power to invest in European countries like before, because the Chinese domestic economy is not doing so well. I think China's financial power is more limited than previously. And secondly, for European countries now, they are more cautious for Chinese investment. For example, in Germany, they don't like Chinese investment like before, and there are many more restrictions, especially for the so-called critical infrastructure. So the situation has changed a lot. But on the other hand, China still wants to invest in Europe because China sees Europe as one continent different from the US. China has no geopolitical conflict with the EU, and China wants to improve its relationship with EU. China wants to encourage the so-called strategic autonomy of EU because China wants to shift the pressure from the United States. That's why China needs more friends, partners, if not allies. Because this is China's tradition, the so-called United Front, United Front. Okay, this is China's tradition. Actually, this is seen as one of the three magic weapons of the Chinese Communist Party to seize the power. The first is the armed struggle, and the second is the party building. And the third is the so-called United Front. This is China's tradition. Of course, the number one enemy is the U.S. All the other countries, including EU and Japan, should be the potential friend of China. That's why China is using its economic power to achieve the political purpose. But it's not so easy because EU is very suspicious. I think EU is very critical toward China. I'm thinking about the uh, complex relationship between China, Russia, EU, and the US. I think we should look at the situation from a big picture, not from a single entity. So I think if the war in Ukraine is ended, the Sino-Russia relationship will become more complex because Russia will need China much less than previously. I think the pressure on Chinese side will increase tremendously. So I think China. I don't know. I don't know. The situation is very complex. Maybe China is not happy, but how can China influence the situation? I think it's very difficult for me as one Chinese. I think the situation will be more challenging for Chinese leadership. This is my estimation.
Yeah, it's also, I think, in relation to Sino-Russian relations, it's definitely not, I would say, enough time to be really aligned, so to speak, because it's been just okay, like they established a good relations maybe in zeros. So it has been just less than even 20 years between Russian Chinese rapprochement, so to speak. So it definitely takes way much more time to understand each other positions, even to work together more closely. At least I know it's which is interesting. Like back in the day when, for example, the school where where I studied French and French and English, they do teach Chinese, for example. So there is certain, even though it was always in English speaking school, which is interesting. So there is a certain level of integration of Chinese, even I would say, culture in Russian society. And not to say that, I mean, I think almost 25 or maybe even more percent of Russian car market now is coming from China or something like this. It takes actually way much, because I mean you cannot actually export like a European car to Russia now. I mean it's illegal. I mean it's the only way. I mean if not illegal from Russian perspective, but it's illegal for Europeans to export them directly or something like that. Anyway, which is of course interesting because as you said, it's very complex, and of course, if Russia reunites at certain capacity with Europe, there would be. I mean, it's interesting how the relations between Russia and China would look like. Whether I think it would be less, I would say, less. There would be some strain on relations. I mean, probably, but then of course, I think we all, to a certain extent, we all come back to how the situation is looking at the United States, in the United States, because it's still the most important actor in the world. So we also don't. I mean, until you take into account American dynamic, I think everything else kind of follows from there, because I also don't know whether there will be another economic crash in the United States, which people discussed recently a lot, or whether how the situation is looking with the artificial intelligence, or so on and so on and so forth. So something that's very contingent on so many different aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very complex because our topic is about the Sino-Russia relationship. From my perspective, I think the relationship between China and Russia will not be optimistic like right now. Why do I think so? Because we have to think about the foundation of the Sino-Russia relationship. Right now, the two countries are working very closely because they have same competitor or rivalry, the U.S. Because Russia is afraid of the U.S. So-called counter-revolution, especially under the administration of Democrats, it's like Biden, like Obama. They have encouraged the counter-revolution in the periphery countries of Russia, maybe inside Russia. And China same. So China is also afraid of the counter-revolution. I mean, this is the ideological fear of both Russia and China, because the ideological campaign supported by the American military power is very formidable for both Russia and China. So Russia and China have motivation to be united, not only from strategic, from geopolitical perspective, but also from ideological perspective, because the Western power, I mean the Western ideology, like the liberalism, is supported by their military power. European countries and the U.S., they are very rich and they are also very powerful in military terms. That's why Russia and China have no choice, because the survival of a regime is always the highest priority. I mean, both in Russia and China. So that's why they have very strong motivation to be united against the U.S. and the European countries. But right now, the situation has changed, because for the current American administration, Donald Trump, he has no any interest in ideology, freedom, democracies, or human rights. He doesn't care. He has no any interest in such values. So this means the danger from the U.S. to both Russia and China is reduced. Then Russia and China have less motivation to work together. Maybe the world will become more multipolar. I think both Russia and China are promoting the idea of a multipolar world. So I think from my perspective, the world will be more chaotic. The U.S. is no longer the single hegemon. U.S. is not in the position anymore to dominate the entire world. So I think the U.S. will shift its focus from Europe and the Middle East to Indo-Pacific Asia and maybe Latin America. Right now, it seems that there will be one huge conflict between the U.S. and Venezuela. I think U.S. has to withdraw from the world stage. U.S. has to focus more on Latin America and Indo-Pacific Asia. Of course, I think that I think China is still the number one strategic competitor of the U.S. This will not change, but I mean the close relationship between China and Russia will be more complex. This is my estimation.
Right, and of course, it's also, I think when we talk about those big topics, it's important to look at the economy. And what struck me, I recently read this article on how China creates. I mean, China buys a lot of physical gold right now, right? And it wants to create this, was this like a kind of new reserve system where they build those I don't know how to even explain it. It's like these institutions, for example, in Russia and other BRICS countries. So every time, so once you buy like a Chinese yuan, you can always exchange it for gold in your country or something like this. So they want to create, in other words, an alternative reserve system because now the only reserve system in the world is American dollar. So which is interesting, of course. And once you understand that the world is shifting actually that fast into the direction that is non-American, of course, it becomes interesting what type of implications we will have like 10 years down the road. Because I mean, I think maybe you also remember, like, even 10 years ago, people thought about the idea of Chinese challenging America as actually hypothetical, right? It's something that people, not all people took it for granted that China would actually reach this level that it can like directly challenge American hegemony, as it already does now, for example, with trying to come up with the idea of alternative like reserve currency, like reserve system. So it's definitely interesting. Of course, and one has to think how the world would look like, let's say, in 10 years. And of course, we entering just definitely territory where basically we don't. I think most of us we don't really know, and it's also a very unique situation, as you said before, because it is, if it is a multipolar, no one knows. No one knows what type of actors can have a certain alignment in the future. For example, I definitely think that American Russian realignment doesn't necessarily mean that Russia would again abandon its relations with China. Rather than it would look like a more complex equation where Russia would try to get a certain benefits for like for disaligning itself from Chinese in certain areas. For example, maybe not giving China, not giving China a lot of oil or something like this, or maybe a lot of gas. Even though, of course, it's probably impossible to think because they build the whole now ecosystem, like ecosystem around giving China Russian gas. So of course, yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it is an interesting time because the world changes, and I think it's an interesting time to observe how the world would look like. But then, of course, something that I still come back to this idea. We all kind of wait and see what's the American response because it's still it feels that still no matter how China rose as in comparatively as economic power, I mean, there's still like American capacity to impact the world is still great. And of course, it's also coming back to the whole, AI debate, artificial intelligence, and the future of technology as well. So I guess we have to see how it unfolds. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I think you are talking about two questions. The first is about the donor dominance, and China is trying to challenge the U.S. financial hegemony. China is trying to internationalize its currency, renminbi. China has been doing that for a long time. And the second is about the foundation of Sino-Russian relationship, probably. From my point of view, it's always complex. I think right now, due to the same distrust against the U.S., due to the same fear for the American pressure, China and Russia are united. They work very closely, but there is also fundamental distrust between the two countries. From my point of view, for Russia right now, Russia is too dependent on Chinese support economically and morally and maybe geopolitically. I don't think Russia likes that because Russia is a very proud country, and Russia don't want to. I think Russia does not want to be too dependent on Chinese support. For many analysts believe, okay, Russia and China are probably partnership or allies, but Russia is a junior partner of China. My supervisor has always emphasized Russia and China are partners. Russia but Russia is a trading partner, and the relationship is asymmetrical. So, because of the war in Ukraine, I think China has more leverage on Russia. I don't think this is what Russia likes. And from Chinese side, I think many Chinese people distrust Russia. There is very strong influence. Some scholars, for example, one scholar has a name Feng Yujun. He's one scholar specialized on Russia. He's a Russia expert in China. He dislikes Russia. He always criticizes Russia. In China, very influential. So his opinion, his idea can spread in China without obstacle. We know Chinese leadership is probably very friendly toward Russia, but there is still space for Chinese scholars to criticize Russia. I think there is deep distrust inside the Chinese scholars and the Chinese ordinary people. They believe Russia is aggressive and Russia is a danger for China, and Russia has seized a huge territory from China. Russia has harmed China much more than any other countries. Maybe the second country is Japan, but Japan has returned all the territory which it has occupied during World War II, like the northeastern China and Taiwan, but Russia has seized the territory from China about 1.5 million square meters. And the Mongolia is also separate from China because of the support of Russia or Soviet Union. So in both Russia and China, there is deep distrust. Even the leadership in both countries are trying to work very closely, but the distrust is still deep. When the circumstances are changed, I think the relation will become more complex.
Right.
In the past, people are talking about the Sino-Russian relationship without limit. No, there is always limits. There is always a limit.
I also don't believe in this, like the Sino-Russian relationship is something without limit. Simply because I don't think that much aligned even culturally or from the perspective of civil society alignment, because I don't think like Russian people like deeply think about Chinese people as we are friends. It's more like this geopolitical narrative, and of course it feels good for Russian people to know that they are not really completely isolated from the world. Once you mentioned. I remember like the imagery from when you remember Putin visited last time China. He gave like press conference in front of this like Chinese like big palace. I don't know the name unfortunately, but it's something that of course is a very impressive PR, so to speak, because you have like this image that Russia has friends, and of course, it pays dividends right now in the sense that Russia can go and present to the West primarily because, we actually still value it somewhere. Like look at because I think it's still true that what everything that Russia does, like internationally, I think it does for Western audience because they're very considerate in terms of how this perceived in the West, less so in other countries, and of course, as you said. Yeah, I think Russian, as you said, yeah, China doesn't trust Russia or like 100%. Yeah, and I think I can definitely see why, because and Russian history is also very unpredictable. It is the history of significant swings and significant changes, and to a certain extent, Russia is, dangerous to itself. Like the Russian society and Russian people, because they did change history so many times. And suffered actually themselves so many times because of the changes they inflicted on themselves. So I mean, can I see some crazy person coming back, like in power in Russia, and completely changing, I would say, the trajectory of Russian, I mean, history in a way that reintegrating with the West, maybe putting like NATO troops or NATO troops on let's say Chinese Russian border. I think this can happen. I mean, and I mean, I think like the more Russia goes into one direction, the more almost power it accumulates to go into the other direction. Because unfortunately, Russia has a very, like I would say, I mean, Russian people in general, they always need to go for some reason almost all in one direction. They have like this uncomfortable, I would say, anxiety with just sitting in neutrality. They cannot just sit and think about themselves as not contributing to something greater. So they always find a way to make a change in the world, if it makes sense. And of course, once you mentioned, yeah, I think Russia still struggles a little bit with this complex that it lost the capacity to actually change the world to a certain extent. So it tries to find ways to compensate for that. And what I mean by that, you can actually literally see it because I mean, it's not Soviet Union anymore. It kind of lost its crown of being, the second biggest opponent of the United States, or like the second biggest and most important country. And I think it still struggles to find like what's Russian meaning then, because I feel for Russia living in the world without Russia contributing some significant change is actually hard. They're still trying actually to find meaning. And of course I remember, for example, in 2010s in Russian narrative cultural debate, it was a very big debate, what's Russian, what's meaning for Russia in the world. And now of course they try to say it is this multipolar world, we're contributing to this multipolar world. I mean, something in me says that it's not the ultimate answer. Actually, they're still searching for meaning. So just I want to maybe confirm your point. Yeah, I mean, there is definitely, I would say it's I understand like why Chinese side doesn't trust Russia 100%. And as you said, like Russia was the part of century of humiliation. I mean, that's also true. And like to the same extent as like Great Britain and other great powers, European great powers, because back then Russia was just another European power. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you have mentioned that Russia can be their own danger. I think this is applicable for Chinese too. For Chinese too, the Chinese can be also their own danger because people are not always rational. Sometimes people are very emotional.
Right.
They react emotionally. They
Right.
cannot always act rationally.
Right.
Actually, I'm very interested in Russia's perception of China.
Mhm.
So, because just now I have talked about the Chinese perception of Russia, very complex. Many
Right.
people admire Russia. In China, there are so many Russia fans. We call it Russia fans. Of course, are not Ukraine fans, European fans, and American fans, but many Russia fans. So it's true. But on the other hand, like I have mentioned, Feng Yijun and other scholars are very critical toward Russia. So I'm interested in Russia's perception of China. From my perspective, it's also very complex. I want to talk about something about cultural identity. I think Russia wants to be one part of the European civilization. This is long time from Peter the Great. Russia wants to be integrated into the European community. Russia wants to be one part of the European civilization. Actually, Russia was one part of the European civilization, and even the Soviet Union. They have the ideology of Marxism. Marxism is a Western ideology, right? So, I mean, Russia is using Western ideology against Western powers. This is very interesting. I think Russia admits that Russia culture is probably not as advanced as European culture, probably because Russia has always learned a lot from European civilization. Probably for many Russian people, yes, European countries are very rich, culturally very influential, and Russia is in some sense behind the European civilization. But for centuries, Russia believes it's more advanced than Asian countries, than the Eastern countries like China. Okay, so Russia is very confident. Or Russia was very confident in front of Asian countries. But right now the situation has changed. Both Russia economy and Russia population are just 10% of China. So and Russia are perceived as a junior partner or little brother of China. So how do Russian people perceive this change? How do Russia perceive China right now? Any insights from you?
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting questions. I guess a few things to say about that. I mean, first, of course, I think that relations with China, it's, I think, a prerogative more of this geopolitical debate. In a way, there is, I would say, because it is mainly geopolitical debate. I would say it's highly censored. I wouldn't think any professor who is really critical of China would work in a Russian university, for example, because it would be impossible to express this opinion because it is a part of like this bigger narrative, and you can go outside this narrative. But to this exact point, I can definitely say, I would say before the war, and I would say maybe before like 2018. Of course, there were a lot of critics of China, and a lot of people. There is like this, I would say, among people, the common fear that China would go and conquer or buy even Siberia or something like this. That's very. I think it's still very prevalent. Yeah. And of course, when you look at those pictures where you see Chinese-Russian border and you see these cities that, agglomerations that have 100 million people, and then you see Russian cities that have barely like, I don't know, 10, like 100,000 maximum people. I mean, of course, you start thinking about whether this can be a possibility, or whether, like, people start like questioning whether, the demise of Russia is an interest of China, for example, because China can go and like probably literally buy those lands at a certain point, because, I mean, China has a lot of capital now. So this is also like the second point. And but then, of course, what also makes me think, like the last point I can say, again, what I mentioned before, I think because there is like a very little actual human to human exchange. Of course, there are like Chinese tourists and Russian people, Russians go to China as well. But I feel it's still a very nascent, I would say, alignment between Russia and China. I think it's not. I mean, it's something that's happening almost there. So, for example, when relations between Russia and the West and Europe, relations were good, people really went willingly to Europe, and there was a lot of exchange between Russian students coming to Europe, European students coming to Russia. So there was a lot of exchange in civil society terms. And I don't see, I think, this happening actually between China and Russia, maybe because, of course, the distances are also very huge. I mean, most Russians live in Europe. I mean, they don't live in Asia. I mean, some people live in Vladivostok. Of course, I think people who live in Vladivostok, of course, they probably go and visit China way much more frequently. But of course, it is still a very new thing, I would say. So in this sense, I think like those three things maybe give you some idea. But for me, I think it's still Russia-China relation. It's something that happening for, like, I would say, elites. It's a geopolitic. So it's not real development that captures like ordinary people imagination, I would say.
Yeah. Thank you, Dimi.
Yeah, it was
It's very interesting conversation. But
Okay.
I think 1 hour has passed. Maybe it's time to close our conversation.
Yeah.
Of course, Sino-Russia relations are a very huge topic. I think, but today we have discussed some interesting points. Maybe in the future, I hope I have opportunity to discuss with you again about some more concrete topics.
Yeah.
Today is quite general. Maybe next time we have more concrete topics. So thank you, and
Thank you.
yeah, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much. It's a long
Yeah.
for you.
No, it was great. It was interesting conversation. But yeah, something that it is a prevalent idea, like that China would go and conquer a certain point. I mean,